After the Rain begins in a very anime fashion. A downward panning shot of clouds, the outside of a school, a phone sits on a desk with music playing into a pair of headphones. Students outside participate in after-school clubs, cicadas chirping all the while. Wind dramatically blows the curtains around in the classroom where a sleeping girl awakens to a text from work, revealing the face of our protagonist, who is greeted by Loud Boy with a crush. Eventually a piano kicks in as after-school clubs fully spring to action and our sleeping cutie departs the school grounds. But there's more to After the Rain than your standard school romance, something that takes it past shows like Just Because and Tsuki ga Kirei into something far more compelling than what should be considered baseline genre workhorses. So what can we tell from these opening minutes? That Tachibana is uninvolved with the world around her. Others are participating in activities. Even Loud Boy, who admits to having slept through most of his classes, is still highly energetic and attempts to socialize with a fellow student as you do in high school. Tachibana is emotionally cold, though she does show a brief glimpse of wanting to be a part of typical high school life. As the track team practices, chanting their school name, Tachibana attempts to run in pace with them on the hill below. She briefly sprints only to stop abruptly and grab at her leg. It's a wide-angle distance shot that the viewer could easily not notice, but this is there to hint at her injury. Then the juxtaposition of the elongated shots of typical anime school to the quick cuts at the restaurant. Something is different. Something is not all too familiar. We're going to see characters outside of school. We're going to see them not just interacting with their love interests. Most importantly, this is a non-traditional romance, because the central relationship is between a 17-year-old high school girl and a 45-year-old restaurant manager. Before we go fully diving on into that matter, let's discuss the character designs. I particularly like Tachibana's 90s aesthetic, with sleek long limbs and facial structure. Her eyes are far less round than typical modern moe counterparts. They're sharp and appropriately distant, with a slit taken out of the cornea, making her glares all the sharper. Consider this in conjunction with Kondo's age, 45, and I think there's something to this. Tachibana is the type of girl he fantasized about nearly 3 decades ago as a youth. Then there is the older coworker, a middle-aged mother with a constant cartoonish sourpuss, which is made partially chuckle-worthy when we see the sign in the restaurant clearly directing the waiting staff to keep smiling. Even the most moe, Yui, is drawn with sharp lines and a pointed chin. But to get back to the goings-on of the restaurant, our introduction is a lively one. From college-age friends, moms out with the children, old housewives gossiping, and even the ever-so-welcomed complaining customer. A fun, classy tune backs it all, helping to sell the busy atmosphere, but not at the cost of being overwhelming. It's here we're introduced to Kondo, a man who we are immediately led to believe is pitiable. He apologizes to customers to a degree that could be perceived as lacking backbone. Even when he goes to scold a cook for serving burnt food, he quickly lowers his voice, and rather than telling his employee what to do, he more so suggests it, to which the cook replies that Kondo's fly is down. Kondo has no power even in a position of power. Yet Kondo is likable because he's such a lame dad. He makes bad puns, is a bit of a slob, not because he can't take care of himself, but because of the other more important factors in his life. Very much in the same way that the protagonist from 2017's popular dating sim, Dream Daddy, is so fun to inhabit. They're lovable and merely doing their best to look out for others, most of all their children, even if slinging several grown-worthy jokes along the way. Tachibana continues to be portrayed as distant. Her resting, bitch face is often on display, confusing customers and coworkers. She is very visibly angry most of the time, but to a degree those around her are left confused, like when she drops the plate and Kondo comes to check on the kitchen and she fires a glare at him. But there's a warmth to Tachibana too, as seen in the shot where she's teaching Yuto, Kondo's son, how to play the recorder. She's crouched down to his eye level and her facial features have softened. Her body motions are slow and she manages to crack a smile, something Kondo is surprised by. These occurrences can be paired up with 2 later scenes, one that initially paints Tachibana as emotionally inept, and the other as kind and insightful. During lunch, a few of her classmates sit next to her in the hall and catch a glimpse of the target of many female students' affection, Yamamoto. He's conventionally handsome and is the captain of the soccer team, well liked by all the guys and desired by all the girls. Except for Tachibana, who describes her type as having bedhead, sometimes forgetting to zip their fly, and sneezing loudly, to which her classmates tease her about a description that obviously sounds like a middle-aged man. Then we see Tachibana solely interacting with her friend from the track team, Haruka, Tachibana is smiling, giving advice and encourages her friend even when the conversation turns to the track team's poor chances at the next meet. Haruka states that they'd be better off if Tachibana was there, an idea casually shot down at Tachibana's mention of her injury. After the Rain is not always so subtle about its metaphors. In a flashback, we see Tachibana forlornly walking around in the rain, taking shelter in the restaurant she'd soon come to work in. We can assume she's going through some sort of trouble, and given the knowledge she sustained a leg injury that prevents her from participating in track, well, you get the picture. So she's waiting out the storm when Kondo approaches with a coffee on the house, a warm smile, and a magic trick. These three kindnesses instantly brighten up the glum teen. The fact that someone noticed she was feeling down and made it their goal to cheer her up is the moment she begins to fall in love. Not another soul is in the restaurant as Kondo walks away, either from it being slow or that Tachibana could see no one else through the warmth of Kondo. The rain eventually stops and Tachibana steps outside, breathing deep to see the sunlight shining through the clouds and rain dripping from the buildings and trees. The visual statement being all the rainy parts of our lives will eventually end and a hopeful new day will arrive. It's only hinted at in the premiere, but clearly Tachibana is frustrated to have had something taken from her in a distinct sense of powerlessness. At some point we experience this in our lives, doors shutting unexpectedly. For me, after graduating high school, my dream job was to be in games journalism, something I'd find to be challenging given its relative small size and niche community. The closest I got was writing for Indie Haven. After 3 short months, I left due to writer's block caused by outside sources, and it felt unfair to know that a good part of my life was cut short by something outside of my control. I had to learn to accept that and move on. Tachibana will have to do the same. The track team means a lot to her, not just because she was good at it, but more importantly for the camaraderie. She's a person who struggles with everyday interactions, and track was a place she felt comfortable and confident. It's not crazy to think Kondo will represent the other side of this, someone well past their troubled youth, but never quite having gotten over it. In the final minutes of the episode, Loudboy accidentally bumps into Tachibana as she's leaving work one rainy night. Kondo is watching from the restaurant, and in a brief second he envisions himself as Loudboy. Given our knowledge about his divorce, his sad sack nature, and not exactly enviable career, it's easy to think Kondo is a man mired by regret. Talking about After the Rain without addressing its central budding romance would be foolish though. Yes, Tachibana is a 17-year-old girl interested in a 45-year-old man, and while I don't care to spoil much, I can say this after watching 6 episodes. Kondo has yet to outright shoot Tachibana down, even when she is very honest about her feelings. In America, age of consent, Romeo and Juliet laws, and other such statutes that alters punishments for sex with a minor depending on the age gap varies. Much of this is determined on a state level with a handful of federal laws backing them up. For example, the age of consent in Washington is 16, while in New York it's 17 and in Florida 18. By no means is the US or other Western countries squeaky clean in this regard, but Japan is seen as more behind the times. The home of anime does have a similar situation in terms of varying age of consent based on prefectures, but the sexualization of children isn't the dirty little secret of Japan's. It's a well-documented issue that a brief Google search can lead you down a very sickening rabbit hole. For example, the possession of child pornography was only made a criminal offense in 2014, and the punishment for such is a slap on the wrist, up to 1 year in prison and or a $1,000,000 fine, which roughly equates to $10,000. Or if you're Nobuhiro Watsuki, famed Rurouni Kenshin manga author, you'll get an $1,800 fine, and that's currently it. This all speaks to Japan's more lax nature by comparison to the West in regards to the sexualization of youths and the act of having sex with someone under the age of 18. This is an incredibly nuanced issue around the world that deserves more than a few brief paragraphs, but I think we can all understand the following. I wouldn't blame anyone coming from a culture like mine watching this relationship being portrayed in a relatively positive light in a show set in our modern world and be turned off. Not that a No Automata block anime is mainstream, but you'd be hard pressed to find an American equivalent. Game of Thrones probably comes to mind for many Westerners when talking shows with age gaps in relationships. However, that's a setting influenced by the medieval era and is decidedly about how shitty humans and the world we've created can be. The original English translation of Koiwa Amagigarai no Yu ni was Love is like After the Rain. The thought behind this being that falling in love often feels like it comes after a dark point in our lives. whether that time was actually a poor one or just seems so by comparison. If the age gap isn't a drop-worthy issue for you, and even if it is, I still urge you to give it a shot, you'll find one of the freshest romance anime in years. With a solid direction, artistic flair, and easy-to-love cast, Winter 2018 has been a bit of a weak season, barring the shotgun blast that was the 10 episodes of Devilman Crybaby arriving at once, but we'll get to that in another video. After the Rain was one of the first standouts thanks to its strong premiere, one that made me think I already know I'm going to enjoy this show, several weeks later, and that remains true. As always, like, subscribe, all that nonsense, it is very much appreciated. And if you can, please donate to my Patreon. That's by far the best way to ensure that these videos keep on coming.